Well, a short time ago, just a few blocks from our studio, several people gathered to remember the 4 Americans who lost their lives in Libya Tuesday night, including a U.S. ambassador. It is a story with developments that continue to change in terms of why and how this could have happened. It was said initially to be a response to an offensive video posted on YouTube by an American filmmaker that ridiculed Islam's Prophet Muhammad. New information has come out, though, that the attack was planned for much longer and that there may or may not have been a full film, and the filmmaker may or may not have been who we thought he was. What we do know is that Ambassador J. Christopher Stevens was pronounced dead at the hospital. And at this hour, the President Obama has sent U.S. surveillance drones and a group of Marines into the country to investigate. Here's President Obama earlier this morning reacting to the killing and vowing to take action.
Make no mistake. We will work with the Libyan government to bring to justice the killers who attacked our people. Since our founding, the United States has been a nation that respects all faiths. We reject all efforts to denigrate the religious beliefs of others. But there is absolutely no justification to this type of senseless violence. None.
Well, today we want to take a broader look at Libya, the relationship the United States and its allies has with Libya, and especially the uprising that took place there last year that resulted in the death of Colonel Muammar Gaddafi and the end of his regime. Now, the rebels were funded and supplied by countries including France, Italy, Great Britain, and the United States, despite some pretty clear red flags. How many red flags? Well, let's take a look at the uprising itself. Most of those involved, who called themselves rebels, they hid their faces. Did we ever know who the rebels were? Who was so desperate to overthrow Colonel Gaddafi, and why? We were told it was for freedom. But taking an honest look back, many of these men, they were terrorists. Here's Asia Times correspondent Pepe Escobar speaking on RT a year ago.
His name is Abdul Hakim Balhaj, and he is an Al-Qaeda asset. He was tracked by the CIA after 9/11. He was friends with Zarqawi. He was captured in Malaysia in 2003. He was tortured in Bangkok, where I lived at the time, in one of those extraordinary rendition CIA prisons in Bangkok. He was sent back to the Libyans. He made a deal with Saif al-Islam in 2009. He was released, and now he's the military commander of Tripoli.
So again, this information from more than a year ago, that one of those leading the rebel group was a CIA prisoner, a former detainee at Guantanamo Bay. And that he headed up this group in Tripoli, and it was supported, by the United States and its allies. Now, I've got to say that these issues are not new. Similar issues were encountered in Afghanistan back in the 1990s, when the West was celebrating an anti-Soviet freedom fighter that you just may recognize. Here's a headline from The Independent in December of 1993, and that anti-Soviet warrior who's putting his troops on the road to peace is, of course, Osama bin Laden. Do I need to explain who that is one day after September 11th? No, I don't think I do. Well, joining me to discuss this further is Walid Phares, advisor to Anti-Terrorism Caucus of the United States Congress and the author of The Coming Revolution, Struggle for the Freedom in the Middle East. Walid, thanks so much for joining us. I want to talk first about what's happening now. Marine forces have landed in Libya. CNN is now reporting that the U.S. is moving 2 Navy ships with Tomahawk missiles to the area. Is there a war about to begin?
Look, this is always what happens after a major strike against U.S. interests occurs. The president, the administration will have to do something because he made a statement that we will have exert retribution. Now, will we be successful or not? That's a different question. Remember the attacks against the embassies in East Africa in 1998. There was a reply by the administration that it did not end it. And that provoked later on Osama bin Laden retaliating against the U.S. So we are now in a cycle of jihadists attacking U.S. and probably other than U.S., including Western interests around the region, and the U.S. trying to respond to that.
It's interesting, though, on quite a few of the Arabic news websites today, people in the region, around Libya, they're reporting that they feel like they're being occupied or invaded. First, there was Afghanistan and Iraq, and now it's Libya. Now, even if that is not what's happening here, do you think the U.S. is doing a good enough job of communicating what's going on?
Well, the problem has been with the administration is that when the Arab Spring began and we discussed it on RT many times, the early wave was made by civil society, by youth, the Google people, April 6, women, minorities. That was the beginning. Unfortunately, Washington chose to ally itself, let me say partner, with the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, for example, with Nahda in Tunisia. And in Libya, as you said in the introduction, the rebels were diverse. You had secular, former bureaucrats, former ambassadors, former military offshoot of the regime, and the Islamists. Unfortunately, we chose to partner with the Islamists, thinking that they are going to stabilize North Africa. And look who the extreme among the Islamists are doing and targeting us, our embassies.
And let's be really clear, of course, no information that we know of so far about who exactly was behind this attack on the U.S. ambassador, Mr. Stevens, or those other 3 Americans, or the various Libyans who were killed there. No information on who they were, but I think it's an important point that you bring up, Waleed, in terms of what has happened in the last year or so in Libya with the United States, with our allies. In terms of this relationship, I mean, talk a little bit about, where the relationship stands now with the U.S. government, with the French government, the British government, and, the Libyan government as it is now.
Well, look, the U.S. administration and, of course, our allies in Europe, the Western allies, NATO, are going to be surprised by not just this attack, but by the widening expression of extremists. I mean, those who attacked the embassy in Cairo, these are Salafi jihadists. They are the extreme, of course, but they are the allies of the sitting government of Egypt. And we are going to be reviewing the decision to send another package of foreign aid. We sent about $1.5 to $1.8 billion to Egypt. Meanwhile, the president of Egypt, Muslim Brotherhood, Mr. Morsi, has been changing the structure of the army of Egypt and placing his own supporters. So this administration and/or the next administration are going to be facing tremendous problems in 2013 in the region.
And it's really, really murky waters, Waleed, to navigate for any government because there are so many factors here. Some of them stem from long before you or I were alive, and some of them stem from recent history and a changing of the guard and a change post-Arab Spring. What do you think, though, are the most important things that leaders, that President Obama today, whoever the next president is, whether it's President Obama or Mitt Romney, that they need to take into account when making decisions about, Libya and Egypt?
In my list, first of all, the sitting president and any next president will have, first of all, to explain very well to the American public, to explain very well what are the forces in the Arab Spring. This is not one chunk of people. This is very diverse. There's those who are Islamists, those who are secular, Arab nationalists, Marxists. You have everybody there. Number 2, we need to choose well our partners. In the region, we need to link up with civil society. I mean, the Arab Spring was about civil society. We don't have a policy to empower women and minorities and labor and middle class. We talk about it here, but we don't apply it in foreign policy. And thirdly, we want to make sure that we are not sending the wrong signal to the region. I mean, excessive military activity without engagement with civil society, that's what the extremists are going to be taken advantage of. And you have just mentioned websites and media attacking the United States.
And we should mention, of course, throughout Libya today, there have been several rallies, several gatherings that have showed support to the U.S., that have showed support for U.S. Ambassador Stevens. Even Cuba has, condemned these attacks. So, we shouldn't say, that everyone is looking on this in the same way, but there are several countries around the world that have been protesting this video that, no one really knows where this came from or what it's all about. Talk a little bit about what you see going forward in terms of what has become really overnight some pretty big dissonance.
It's a big dissidence on the one hand, but on the other hand, as you just mentioned, that's very important. There is a rallying, against those extremists, including from within Libya. Do we know, for example, in the United States, that in the last legislative elections in Libya, the seculars won, but yet they don't have power because the militias on the ground who have the weapons, actually the weapons that we sent them and the weapons that they captured from Gaddafi, are more jihadists. So what we need to do basically is to identify the forces on the ground inside Libya of lawmakers and civil society, empower them, send them the foreign aid. And second thing we need to do internationally is to widen the coalition. I mean, the U.S. cannot be alone in this business. We need to have the Europeans, the Indians, the Brazilians, if the Russians are interested, and the Arab moderates as well, to create an international coalition and to isolate the extremists.
I want to take a look at some media coverage that was shown here in the United States shortly after Gaddafi was captured on that day.
Breaking news out of Libya reports that deposed dictator Muammar Gaddafi is dead.
The Libyan fighters say they have defeated the last forces loyal to Muammar Gaddafi.
42 years of terror seemingly ended just hours ago.
And there's the picture that's being circulated that is purported to be Muammar Gaddafi.
Tripoli erupted in celebration to what appears to be the end of a brutal era.
This is a huge day for the rebel forces, the revolutionary forces in Libya.
A huge day, the end of a brutal era. Do you think that what was communicated by the mainstream media here in the United States, did a good enough job in portraying what was actually happening on the ground there?
Not really. You just showed it. I just heard it. Every revolution has stages. I mean, look at the French Revolution. It lasted 30 years, from one bloody wave to another bloody wave. Every revolution in Russia and in the Middle East. What we need to have been able to do then was to locate those forces that are really ready to move to liberal democracies, that are really ready to move at least to some form of democracy. It doesn't have to be American or European, Libyan democracy, and then work with them. What we've done was to subcontract, basically, politics in Libya to whomever the rebels were, and we didn't have a good idea. I mean, the government did not have a good idea about those rebels. So the most organized, the better trained and weaponized, i.e. in this case the militias, the jihadi militias, are the ones who are now having the control over national security in Libya.
All right, certainly, again, a developing story, a changing story. Every hour we seem to learn new details. Appreciate having your insight here. Walid Faris, advisor to the Anti-Terrorism Caucus of the U.S. Congress, also author of The Coming Revolution, Struggle for Freedom in the Middle East. Thanks so much.
Thank you.